Now, in 1998, Mark Langridge, who was living with his partner in a gay relationship, was asked by a lesbian friend, also in a relationship, if he would help them have a child. He agreed to be a sperm donor by the Turkey-based method and believed they'd agreed he would have no paternal responsibility for any child that came about as a result. Well, a girl was born later that year. Then in 2000, a second girl was born by the same method with the same agreement. In June of this year, he was contacted by the Child Support Agency and asked to pay his dues as a father. Well, I spoke to him earlier this morning. Why did he decide to donate his sperm?
Well, she was a friend, and me and my partner had got to know her, and talking to her over the months just seemed like a nice thing to do. She had a desire to be a parent. I had no desire to be a parent, but I could easily make her dreams come true. So it seemed, so easy to do it that there was no real reason I could see why not to.
What sort of legal advice did you have about it?
Well, back then, late 90s, there was no internet to speak of, no access to the sort of information we take for granted now. The only thing I could think of doing was to speak to a friend of mine who is a solicitor, and she said, well, you could draw up a document between you, but there would be it wouldn't stand up in court. And her advice was, even if you did it, what would be the point, sort of thing.
If you hadn't done it, what was her alternative to try and get pregnant? We're talking 13 years ago.
Well, just to keep asking, I think. Just to keep asking around.
How likely would it have been, say, if she'd tried to go to a clinic?
Well, it's my understanding that back then in the late 90s, that would have been pretty much closed off to a lesbian woman or even a single woman. Official sperm banks would only see couples who were having problems conceiving. So she had no option, really, but to seek a private donation.
Now, Mandy was quoted in a newspaper as saying you'd agreed to share being a parent. In your opinion, what terms did you actually agree?
The agreement we had was that there would be no financial or parental obligation or commitment on my part. I was quite happy to see the children as, the children of friends, and to be, sort of involved to a certain extent. Me and my partner would go and see them if there was an occasion, like a gathering, a barbecue, or just a Sunday afternoon round at their house. And we would just go as part of the crowd.
What feelings did you have for the girls?
Well, like any children, of friends, it's a happy thing to be around. I mean, after Mandy fell pregnant with the first one, we didn't see her at all until the first child was born. She just, she said, she was quoted as saying she thought it would always be one big happy family. Well, we weren't contacted at all, apart from when she said, I am pregnant. That was it, until after the child was born. So she certainly didn't want us around during the pregnancy. And then it was always at her sort of beck and call. She'd ring us, some friends are coming over. Did you want to come over for the afternoon? And me and my partner would go. All of a sudden, the girls were saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. Well, that wasn't a decision that I had any part in, or, a conversation I had with their mother.
But I know you had taken the girls out with your partner.
Well, that was later on, yeah.
And your parents, I know your parents are separated, but they had also visited them.
They had a little bit of contact. Yeah, I mean, me and Mandy were friends. Me, my partner, Mandy and her partner were all friends, and there's 2 children around. Obviously, I'm the biological father. You talk to your parents about what you've been up to. My parents knew the situation. They, wanted to meet the girls, and, but it was always at Mandy's behest.
But how naive was it, Mark, in retrospect, to contribute to creating 2 lives, enjoy some of their childhood, involve their grandparents, but have no responsibility?
Well, they had 2 parents. My argument is there was another parent there, a full-time parent who was in every way involved in those children's day-to-day lives.
Now, my understanding is that Mandy says she and the other woman were not permanent partners. It was just a temporary arrangement. What's your understanding of what was going on there?
Her partner, Jackie, was always around. If I'd have had any doubts, I wouldn't have got involved. She came across as someone who was sorted in a relationship and financially sorted.
How much are you expected to pay by the CSA?
At the moment, they've said £26 a week, which sounds quite small and quite petty, but it's because I'm on very low income. I'm self-employed. I'm trying to get more work like we all are. If my work sort of load and my earnings went up, so would the contribution I'd have to make. It's a proportion, a percentage of what you earn that they want to take.
So what do you want to happen now?
Well, I want the law to be addressed. The fact that they've changed the law so that now a lesbian and a single woman can go to an official sperm bank, so therefore any donation would have a bit more protection. They've also, it's my understanding, in the case of a private donation, there is more protection for the donor as well. So somewhere along the line, in these intervening years, there's been a decision reached that both of those things were wrong and had to be addressed. That the fact that a lesbian woman would have no option but to seek a private donation and the private donor would be liable have obviously been put right. All I want is that to be applied to my case.
Mark Langridge, we did, of course, ask the mother of the children, Mandy Baker, to give her side of the story. She declined. She's engaged Max Clifford as her agent and is due to appear on a television programme. So what is a father? At what point do you become liable for child support? And what would happen now if a man were to make a similar kind of agreement with a friend? Well, Lara Vitjens is Chief Executive of the National Gamete Donation Trust. Natalie Gamble is a lawyer who specialises in the issues surrounding fertility treatments and joins us from Southampton. Natalie, what does the law say about the position of someone like Mark?
Well, the law is very black and white, and essentially if you're the biological father, then you are financially responsible unless you fall within one of the very clearly defined categories of being a legal sperm donor. And those are that you have either donated your sperm through a licensed clinic, or that you have donated to a couple who are either a married couple or nowadays also a lesbian couple who are civil partners. And if you don't fall into any of those categories, you are the legal father and you're financially responsible.
Lara, how many more cases do you reckon there may be like this one?
There are thousands of cases of people who have donated this way or have received this way, but when it comes to relationship breakdown, which ultimately this is, we have no idea.
So Natalie, if someone like Mark did exactly the same thing now, making a private arrangement, no lawyer involved at all, just nothing written down at all, what would his position be now?
Well, it would depend entirely on the status of the people he donates to. So if he would donate to a lesbian couple who were in a civil partnership, then they would both be the legal parents of the child. So they would share financial responsibility and he wouldn't have any responsibilities at all. If he were to donate to a lesbian couple who were not in a civil partnership, then the position would be the same unless the donation had happened through a licensed clinic, which, as Mark said quite rightly, is possible now in a way that it wasn't 13 years ago.
Well, now, civil partnerships, Natalie, were introduced in 2004. The law was changed, as you say, in 2009. How likely is it for Mark to get some sort of retrospective amendment?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult because obviously any retrospective amendment is going to affect a lot of people who kind of went into arrangements on the basis of a different law. And our law here, you know, in other countries they have law which defines parentage based on what people intend at the outset, but we've never taken that approach here. We have kind of quite clearly defined rules about who the parents are. And so it would be quite difficult, I think, to amend our existing law because it would create a situation potentially where anybody who's a biological father could say, well, I'm not responsible because I was just acting as a donor. So there need to be quite clear boundaries. And, you know, the boundaries that have been agreed are the ones that I've just been describing. And it would be, I think, difficult to apply that retrospectively unless we change the whole framework, so it's kind of on the basis of what people are agreeing at the outset. But again, then it would have to be very clear what was agreed. There would have to be some kind of formal agreement, I'm sure.
Lara, what impact could this case coming to prominence have on future donations?
As Natalie says, I think it's highly unlikely that will change the law because so many cases are involved. But what will happen is, I hope so anyway, that it's a warning for people who intend to use a sperm donor or indeed sperm donors to seek legal advice and be absolutely sure how they do it. The best is still going via a licensed clinic because then you can absolutely sure about not just the legal status of the donor and indeed the children who the parents are, but also some medical checks and genetic tests, which clearly with an informal arrangement as this is not happening. And it protects the patients as well, because the reverse case could also be true, and we've seen that happening, is that donors actually then want to have access. They, from the outset, they think they don't want access to the children, all of a sudden feel that there's a connection there, then go to the mother, and the patients are actually find that they're in a position that they don't want to be in.
Why, though? I mean, people must be aware that there may be complications that can arise from this, and yet people are still doing it. They're still making informal arrangements. Why?
I don't understand. I mean, you mentioned the word naivety. That's ultimately what it is as well. Relationships between people do break down, and what I find astonishing is that you need a signature for a library card nowadays. But just because it's an easy process, especially with informal donation, it can be done easily. Of course, people take it lightly.
Well, as Mark explained,
well, absolutely, and because it's done so easily, and you can do it, in the privacy of your own home, people take it very lightly, and that's something we need to warn people about.
How conscious, Natalie, are you of people still doing it informally, and what's your theory as to why they might do it?
I think there are lots of reasons why people do it. I mean, sometimes it's to do with the cost of going through a fertility clinic. Sometimes it's because if people are in a lesbian relationship or they're single, they don't actually feel they have a medical condition and they need medical treatment. And sometimes it's because people want to know more about the donor than would be possible through a clinic, and perhaps for him to even have some involvement. And we deal with a huge number of private sperm donation arrangements, and it's probably worth saying that these kinds of cases where things go horribly wrong are not a big proportion of them. That are, a lot of people go into arrangements and everything actually works very well. And, as long as everyone remains in agreement, the legal issues that are underlying it don't necessarily cause a problem. But there is a risk if you go into things without the protection of the law. So I think the most important thing is for people, if they choose to do that for any of those reasons I've just mentioned, are very clear about what the law is that is underpinning their situation. So they understand that if, people fall out, then things could go very horribly pear-shaped.
So just to reiterate, if a couple came to you, not a couple, but a man and a woman who wanted to do this but were not a couple, what would you say absolutely vitally they must do before embarking on an informal arrangement?
Well, it all hinges on what you've done before conception. So if you want to have a situation where the donor is not the legal father, you either the couple need to register as civil partners if they're in a lesbian relationship, or everybody needs to go to a clinic and register and deal with the conception there. It's also a good idea to put in place an agreement, or at least think about the kinds of issues around what kind of roles everyone's going to play, and is the donor going to be involved in any way, so that there is absolute clarity about how things are going to work. I mean, as Laura mentioned, we deal with cases as well where things have gone wrong because the donor actually wants more involvement than the mothers are happy with. And in those situations, it's really important to make sure everybody's clear about what everybody wants, because if there are mismatched expectations, it can be a recipe for disaster.
Natalie Gamble and Laura Vitchins, thank you both very much indeed for being with us.